I think for me, that's the other thing I want to say. I want to see more people. We have to take back our power. I remember during uh, the when Kenyan youth were taking back their power, someone said something that was interesting. She said they had delegated their power for MPs to work for them. Since they didn't, they were going to come and do group work. And it reminded me when we were doing group work and you contribute what you think should be the solution to the challenge that you've been given. I think I would like to see more young people, more movements, more trade unions, more everyone coming to do group work with our negotiators so that we have a framework convention that works for all of us. Yeah.
Okay. More engagement with the negotiators. Interesting. So I'm about to bring this conversation to a close, but I have one interesting question for each of you. So you have an opportunity to tell your negotiator one thing, just one thing, to actually keep them motivated through this whole process. What would you tell them? Kwesi, should I start with you?
Well, so, I mean, it's hard to choose, but I'll respond to your question shortly, but one of the things I think worth pointing out from this process is that when we speak as Africans together, for me, the room represented a Pan-African voice. When we work together, we're irresistible. I mean, nobody can push us back. And I'm raising this because I remember the COP in Durban, I think it was COP 11 or so, when, the famous principle, common but differentiated principles, were decimated essentially by a pushback from the global north, who simply wanted to abdicate their responsibility for having polluted, and destroyed essentially the climate. And now today we have pledge and review, essentially, which means it doesn't matter how much you've polluted historically, just do whatever you think you can. And countries that have contributed the least are having to shoulder more than their fair share. So essentially, we're just flipping the coin and saying, no, not anymore. We have to get our fair share of the taxes due us to fund, the mess that's been created by way of, climate change and underdevelopment. But I mean, I think one of the things is that I think the African negotiators have some red lines. I think those red lines are backed by empirical evidence. And I think, so for example, issues around, allocation of tax rights, issues of taxation of high net worth individuals, issues around illicit financial flows, tax avoidance and tax evasion, but then also mutual administrative assistance as well as capacity. I think they have some red lines that I think are backed by the empirics that they need to hold on to. But the last thing I think worth pointing out, if I have to speak to a negotiator, is that I think their position around, arbitration, it's great because, and I just cite you one example. Just a few years ago, Nigeria was slapped by a high court in London, actually a court in London, for, I think, $10 billion for a company that claimed to have invested $50 million in that country, a gas processing company. And they came back and said for the abrogation of the contract, they were due that much. And the court awarded them. Now, it was only when the Nigerian government proved that, one, it was a corrupt process they adopted, and it was full of fraudulent deals. It was only then that the High Court in London basically ruled against, basically reversed the ruling. Now, that cost that country a lot. And imagine if that award of $10 billion had stood. Can you imagine the damage it would have done to an economy that is made up of 235 million people?
It's a lot.
I mean, that is how terrible, arbitration is. And because often it happens in the global north, it serves the interest of the global north countries because the arbitrations don't happen in Nairobi or in Accra. It will either be in London, Paris, or New York. So I think we need to learn from our evidence. Arbitration is off the table. I think all the other options are worth considering.
And what
Arbitration,
are
and I
these
think,
options?
and our negotiators were clear in that. And I think that I would say let's stick to our goals, our red lines, and not giving. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Who goes next? Alan?
River.
Alan? River?
I was
River?
going to say what he said.
I'm sorry.
Basically, what he
Just
said.
repeat.
I mean, just everything that he said, same, ditto. No, I mean, just in a nutshell, that there's 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 only so much inequality that is acceptable. Sure, we will always be unequal, but at some point, it's just obscene. You know, we're coming up to having our first trillionaire, dollar trillionaire. And when you try to represent this, forgive my example in rice, I'm Asian, but like someone tried to represent it in terms of jars of rice, and it was like 100 jars of rice relative to, a pinch. That's what a trillion looks like. And inequality is not just, it's not just bad for, inadequate public services, inadequate resources, but it also skews power even more. And we see more and more billionaires taking political positions. We see rising authoritarianism to able to keep power, and it skews everything. And so, I mean, my last point would just be that this is our collective planet. This is our collective resources. This is we are in this earth together, and yeah, we need to make it work for everyone. There's no need to have that level of obscene wealth,
Yeah.
which is happening through avoidance and evasion, and yeah.
Okay, Alan, it's your turn now.
If I was to, I think, yeah, I think, like I said, for me, first to talk to our negotiators, is to say that yes, we should keep the leadership. I think Christy talked about it. We have to remember that from the General Assembly, from the resolution that actually brought us to this process, most countries were, especially those in the global north, were opposed. They didn't vote for this, but it passed anyway because we were united. We started the negotiations around the terms of reference, certain things like decision making, even the decision actually to have to negotiate two protocols at the same time as negotiating a convention. It was basically to derail the process, but of course, because of the red lines that Chrissy talked about, we had to say, okay, we'll have the convention, but also have these other sort of protocols. And one of the other protocols that were mainstream, though, was being pushed around, the one on disputes. We saw how the conversations around that went. But I think to our negotiators, I think we should keep the leadership. I think a lot of things have happened because the African group has said or not said things, or has done or not done things. I think um, we need to maintain that leadership, but also we can also commit to our negotiators, that us from our constituencies, as young people, as trade unions, as civil society, as this, that we are going to give them the support that they need when we can. Because I think most of the times, if we saw in the negotiations where the discussion was going haywire, and then civil society comes in, and then we sort of bring them back, and all that. Yeah, and where there's need also for political will, I think we are going to manufacture it. We don't have to ask for it. Yes, so that they do their jobs. Of course, why I'm saying this is that negotiations are a bit different. When we go to our countries, most of the times we're at loggerheads with our governments. They are doing very many things we do not like, and at home we may be called antagonistic, we may be called all those other things. But when we're negotiating a once in a generation, a once in a lifetime sort of framework, I think we put aside most of those things that we disagree on at home, and say that we're going to give them the support that they need to see this through. And that's why I'm saying, for the political, we'll have to manufacture it. We won't ask for it. We will keep this conversation in the phases where it's supposed to be, and then hopefully we'll get a convention that rewrite some of the historical wrongs, but also gives us a future that we are not worried about leaving our children.